We're here with a live Q&A. DraftKings, FanDuel picks, MMA DFS, UFC 284, best bets, picks, line advice, you name it. We're here to help you out. Live Q&A. Super Bowl tomorrow. We have a super fight tonight. Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski, Yair Rodriguez, Josh Emmett. 2 title fights on the line, and we're here to help break it down for you. No matter which angle you're taking, I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, what's up, bud?
Yo, man, big weekend, crazy pay-per-view event, got the Super Bowl tomorrow. God, we're all going to be either rich or broke by the end of tomorrow.
Rich, broke, and definitely tired. I will say that for sure. So, welcome to everyone who's watching. What we normally do in these live Q&As, we will break down the 2 main events from a betting and DFS perspective. We'll talk about what it means when there are 2 main events on a DFS card. We will run through the newcomers, those making their UFC debut, what type of fighters they are, what we can expect from them in their first matchup. We'll play good fighter, bad matchup, bad matchup for those fighters who have less than 4 UFC fights under their belt to give some context to their stats. You see the Prize Picks promo code there on screen. Use promo code OCCUPY to get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. It's Super Bowl weekend, so you can parlay some UFC props with some Super Bowl props. No better time. And we'll give you our favorite Prize Picks play for tonight as well. A fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins is likely to score very well. And then we'll close it out with our stream parlay of the week. If you have questions as we go along, you see the chat to the right of the YouTube box. Go ahead and ask it. If you're watching this on replay, again, we're recording this and going live at 3 p.m. The slate locks at 6 p.m. If you watch it afterwards, after it's live, and you still have questions before the slate starts, hit up our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Chat with us and come sweat out the fights with us tonight. So, Jake, all that being said, 2 5-round fights on the card. We've had quite a few of these over the last couple of years as we've been tracking. I don't believe much has changed since the last time we've discussed it, but a refresher for those who are new or may have forgotten. What are we typically looking to do, both FanDuel and DraftKings, when it comes to 2 5-round fights on a card?
Yeah, it really hasn't been long. We just had the January 21st card with 2 of them. And once again, we saw on that card exactly one 5-round fighter ended up in the winning DraftKings lineup, which is our go-to strategy. Looking at the last 11 UFC cards that have had 2 5-round fights on them, there was only once where we didn't have a single 5-round fighter. And then there was 6 instances where we had exactly 1, and there was 4 where we had 2. And obviously we know the field is primarily playing 2. If you look at the average split on the ones where it was just a single 5-round fighter that ended up winning, the average split was 5 ways. If you look at the average split on where 2 were in the winner, it goes up to 27 ways. So obviously, not only does playing just 1 in the majority of your lineups win more often, when you do win, you win more money because the field is primarily going 2. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple, hasn't changed. Data still backs it up. 5 of the last 8 have had exactly 1 5-round fighter in the winning DraftKings lineup.
Perfect. Love to see that. No better angle when it hits more often and you win more money when it hits. So there you go. Likely to have 1 5-round fighter in the winning lineup tonight, and you win more when you do it. So that's definitely the angle to play if you're making just a couple lineups. Obviously, you can allow more iterations if you're making multiple, tons of lineups, 20 lineups, 150 lineups. But 1 5-round fighter in high-risk lineups is the way to go. What about low-risk contests, Jake? 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads, any cash games? We're still looking to roughly stack 1 fight and play 1 from the other, right? 3 5-round fighters is typically the sweet spot for risk and reward.
Yeah, definitely, man. So you basically just have to pick 1 guy to leave out. And I think the natural option, if you just look at it initially, be like, okay, well, we're going to play Makhachev, Yair, and Emmett because, Volk's probably going to lose. But that makes it really hard to fit in your last 3 spots. So I actually ended up stacking Makhachev, Volk, basically for price purposes, and then choosing 1 of Yair and Emmett to play and leave out the other one. I went with Yair. He's the favorite. We saw the line move in his favor. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily blame anyone if they went with Emmett, but the key is you only want to have 2 underdogs in your low-risk lineups. You really don't want to be playing 3 underdogs.
Totally fair. Good stuff there, Jake. All right, let's get into these specific matchups. And the chat is buzzing for Islam, for Volk. Questions about Emmett. And we have a couple people. Some people say you have to play Islam. Some say you have to fade him due to his ownership. Some are picking Volk because of his striking. Some are asking about Emmett's injury rumors. So, just really quickly, Jake, what do you make of this Josh Emmett injury rumor? Because we did see a spike in the line movement. We don't know what that was for. Obviously, there's some Twitter rumblings about Emmett's hip injury, but does that impact your decision making at all?
A little bit. I was looking at that fight on Wednesday, like right before we saw that big spike in the line move, and we saw Yair's line go all the way up to negative 196, but we have gotten a little bit of pushback. He's negative 190 now on FanDuel. So it didn't just keep going. Like we saw a big spike on Wednesday, and it got concerning. Like, okay, maybe there's a serious injury. A rumor, has been going around that Emmett has a hip injury that might be ongoing. Did it flare up? I mean, who knows? There was, talk about him like not doing the public workouts. I mean, it's one of those things where we don't really know until the fight happens. But I would say it's a red flag for sure. So it has me a little bit lower on Emmett going into the fight than I would have otherwise been. Like originally I was like, this is a pretty close fight. Emmett has the power. Yair has more volume. If there's going to be a finish, it's more likely to be Emmett who knocks out Yair. But in a decision, I would see Yair landing a little bit more volume. But I mean, if you're looking at the coin flip and all of a sudden one guy might be injured, then obviously that's going to kind of sway your opinion for the other one there.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, let's see here. Chucky's asking in the chat, where is the DraftKings Super Bowl showdown? Yeah, so check our channel. We actually just posted that about an hour ago. It's in our uploaded videos, the DraftKings Super Bowl showdown breakdown. I did it with Jack. Again, it's on our channel, and our site has the daily plug up as well. So, all right, Jake, let's talk about Makhachev versus Volkanovski. Volk coming up from 145 to try to be a double champ. Makhachev first defense against the pound for pound #1 best fighter in the world. Obviously, we know that moving up a weight class is a big deal. That's reflected in the line. How does this fight play out? What does it mean for DFS? Because the biggest question to me is obviously if Volk wins, he's going to be in the winning lineup. But for low risk, small field, and even large field, if not that many dogs win, can Volk put up enough volume against a guy who's historically really tough to hit to be in winning lineup? So what are your thoughts overall? And maybe quickly, because we do have only 22 minutes left, but thoughts on this fight and how it plays out?
Yeah, man, it is a tricky matchup. Makhachev has the all-time UFC record for the fewest significant strikes absorbed at 0.95 per minute. Obviously, that's not a great sign for Volk. Makhachev 66% takedown accuracy. He's landed 27 of his 41 UFC attempts. Like really good at getting people down. I mean, obviously Volk has a wrestling background. He's a BJJ black belt. He's done a great job of not only not getting taken down, but when he does get taken down, of getting right back up. So I mean, he's a tough guy to control, and it's hard to predict exactly how those wrestling exchanges will go until we see it. Volk hasn't fought at 155 since his UFC debut. He spent some time adding some muscle for this fight, but I mean, it's just hard to say exactly how it's going to go. He almost got submitted by Brian Ortega twice. I mean, you could say he also got out of those and they were super tight, but he also almost lost. Right. So I would say Makhachev, is a better wrestler significantly than Brian Ortega and larger. So I think it's going to be much tougher on Volk here, man. It's a really tough matchup. I think it's going to be really fun watching it play out, but it's really hard to see Volk just knocking Makhachev out. I mean, that's not really what Volk does, right? It's a accumulation of damage is how he wins his fights. So he's not the guy that comes in and lands one punch. So how do you get an accumulation of damage against the guy that absorbs the fewest strikes in the history of the UFC and will be looking to take you down the whole time? I mean, it's definitely a challenge, which makes it hard to get behind Volk. But I mean, who knows, man? Maybe he can make it a greasy decision and he gets the Australia, scorecards to help him out. I think that's probably his only real path to winning, unless Makhachev gasses out late in the fight, which, he hasn't been in a bunch of these 5-round wars like Volk has. Makhachev has been finishing guys early. So I guess his cardio is still somewhat of an unknown. And if Volk just keeps getting up, maybe we do see Makhachev slow down. But I think it's a really, really brutally tough matchup for Volk. And maybe it's a trickier matchup for Makhachev to get a finish just based on how durable, Volk's won 22 straight fights. We saw him get out of those submission attempts against Ortega. Maybe it is a tougher spot to get a finish. Maybe Makhachev ends up winning a decision and, he's relying entirely on his grappling to really score well in DFS at that point.
For sure. And the other angle to this, too, is we often see wrestlers ceiling against tougher competition and Volk would qualify here if Volk's get up game can be up to par against Makhachev. Whereas before, Makhachev would take someone down, he would hold them down and submit them or keep them down for the entire round. If Volk can get up, we could see 7, 8, 9, 10 takedowns over the course of a 5-round fight, right?
Yeah, no, I totally think so. I think I talked about that some of the write-ups is like because Volk is so good at getting up, yeah, for sure. We could just see chain wrestling where it's takedown, get up, takedown, get up, takedown, get up, and he could get 3 takedowns in 15 seconds or something.
True. That's very true. And yeah, as Patrick points out in the chat, the $6,700 price tag is very juicy too. And I think a lot of people, even if you're a casual fan, you're going to see Volk at 6,700, and there's a reason he's going to be 30% plus owned. There's a reason his ownership is going to exceed his money line and his chances of winning, Jake. So if you had to fade one fighter in all of your lineups, would it be Islam or would it be Volk?
It would be Volk.
Okay, I agree. All right, let's move on to Yair Rodriguez and Josh Emmett. We talked about this already with Emmett's potential injury, but just stylistically and DFS scoring wise, what are the ceilings for these two fighters?
Yes. So neither guy has scored especially well in recent decisions. Yair's a Taekwondo guy. I think he's landed 1 takedown in his last 7 fights. So he's entirely reliant on striking and knockouts to score well. On the other side, you have Emmett, who has a wrestling background, but never really wrestles. And he's entirely reliant on his power to win fights, whether that's through knockouts or just landing knockdowns. He's tied for the most knockdowns in featherweight history at 11. And he hasn't even been a featherweight that long, 8 fights. So it's pretty impressive. Although the first time he didn't get a knockdown was his last fight, as he's kind of going up in competition. And on Yair's side, he's never been knocked down in the UFC. So if Emmett's largely reliant on knockdowns, this is a tougher matchup for him to, get a multi-knockdown performance. So, I mean, we look at Emmett's last score, he scored 73 DraftKings points in a 5-round decision win against Cater. I mean, we saw a decent volume, but with no takedowns, with no knockdowns. I mean, arguably Emmett even lost that fight, but tougher for him to score well on decision. So I would say he's more reliant on a knockout to really score well. And the only time Yair has lost early in the UFC was like a post-round 2 doctor stoppage against Frankie Edgar. So not really a guy that gets knocked out a lot. I think we could see a fun striking battle. But if we don't see any wrestling, it's going to be harder for either guy to really hit a ceiling performance without a finish. And if it goes the distance, I think there's a pretty good chance that it's not a super high scoring decision. And, we could see someone score like 80 to 90 points unless there's some knockdowns. Then obviously, each knockdown is going to add to that.
For sure. If you're willing to fade, so at the top we said play 1 5-round fighter in your tournament lineups. That's the way to go. If you only made 1 tournament lineup, would you be fading this fight in lieu of the Makhachev Volkanovski fight?
Yeah, I think so, man. I think if I could only pick one of the 4 5-round fighters, I think it would be Makhachev.
Fair enough. And so one question from the chat is, are we going to be under the field on Volkanovski? I'm personally playing 0%. Jake, I assume you're under as well?
Yeah, I mean, of course, man. Anytime the field is playing more than his chances of actually winning, I mean, I feel like there's only one option. Unless you think that line is so egregiously wrong, there's only one option here, and it's to be under, like significantly under, probably.
For sure. And AO in the chat says, can we fade the main event? Maybe Islam gets priced out. I would think that's possible as well, Jake, because we haven't really talked about it, but all the fighters that are priced 8,800 or higher, 8,700 or higher can put up 110 plus. So it wouldn't be shocking to see Makhachev not be a top 2 scorer in that group.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. He has to score. He has to outscore both of the Australian Jacks. He has to outscore, Loma, Luke Boonmi. Yeah, I should know that name by now, considering I bet on her every time she fights. But has to outscore Tyson Pedro. Rodriguez, Malarkey. We have all these guys that have really high scoring potential. So if there was going to be one of these multi 5-round cards where neither 5-round fight produced a winner in tournament winning lineups, I would say this is probably the more likely that we've seen in a while. Especially with Makhachev with the tough matchup, and then with what we just talked about with Emmett Rodriguez having some lower scoring potential. If it doesn't get a finish, and the odds say 58% chance that fight goes the distance, so yeah, I think we definitely have some potential here that Makhachev wins, gets outscored. Jack Della scores 120, outscores Makhachev at a similar price tag, and we do end up with 0. So I would rather go 0 5-round fighters than 2 on this card for sure.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Jayhawk's in the chat. What's up? Jayhawk says it feels like on FanDuel, Islam could get priced out due to the scoring system, and I assume you agree with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like with no control time and with no ground strikes, then yeah, I would say that Islam is much more dependent on getting an early submission on FanDuel.
Do you prefer the other fight then on FanDuel? Because we have a couple questions about Emmett on FanDuel as well. If that's just a purely striking battle and we get point 0.6 points per significant strike, I could see where that is the higher scoring of the two 5 round fights.
Yeah, no, I agree there. I think that if we're looking at the scoring system, the Islam fight's better on DraftKings, and the Emmett fight is better on FanDuel. And Emmett's pretty cheap at $17 on FanDuel, so I think there are a lot more ways for him to get into the winning lineup on FanDuel.
Perfect. That sums it up nicely. All right, let's move on to the UFC debut fighters making their first walk to the octagon. We'll start from the earliest fight of the night until the latest fight. Jake, in the first one, we have Elvis Oliveira or Elvis Brenner or Elvis Oliveira Brenner or Elvis Oliveira Brenner dos Santos, depending on which site you look at. Uh, Background, how good is he? What about this matchup?
Yeah, so he's a 25-year-old Brazilian grappler coming in 13-3. 11 of those wins have come by submission. He's just 4-3 in his last 7 fights, and he's been very binary results. So 4 first-round submissions, 3 decision losses. Basically, all of his recent fights have ended in one of those two ways. He stepped into this fight on like 29 days notice after Joel Alvarez dropped out, so he hasn't had a ton of time to prepare. About a month. Not, I would call short notice a couple weeks, so longer than short notice, but less than a full camp. He's still really young. He's only 25, so he's that age and that level of inactivity where he could surprise us and look better than he has in recent fights. He's been fighting like once a year for the last 3 years, so I mean, maybe he's made some improvements, but I mean, he's basically a grappler going against a guy that's 100% takedown defense. Russian guy. Historically probably going to have pretty good wrestling. So rough matchup. And I mean, I think the odds tell you everything you need to know. I mean, he's coming in at plus 425, so 18% implied chance to win. Seems like submission or bust.
Fair enough. All right, moving on down, we have Blake Builder, El Animal, fighting Shane Young.
Yeah, so Blake's a little bit older, coming in at 32. He's coming off a first-round submission win on the Contender Series. Just an opponent that basically has been getting submitted all the time, so take that with a grain of salt. Builder just got his black belt. He has a boxing background, but really slow starter. He got knocked down 3 times in the first round in his last fight before going on Contender Series. Just like a crazy fight, and he comes back and gets a third-round TKO, which was his first knockout of his career. So I mean, absolutely almost got knocked out in the first round of that fight. And you look back one fight further, he took on an opponent that came in on one day's notice and controlled him on the mat for the first 9 minutes of the fight. And then Builder throws up a triangle in the final minute of round 2 and gets a submission after getting dominated for 2 rounds. So he's good at like mounting comebacks late in fights, but I would say the first round is generally tough. Although I mean, he did get a first round submission in on Contender Series. Although even that fight started pretty slow, kind of circling around on the outside the octagon, landed one punch and hopped on his opponent's back. So pretty quick at grabbing people's necks, but overall, I think he needs to figure out how to not be such a slow starter if he wants to find success winning, but also in DFS. If you don't do anything in the first round, it's going to be harder to score well with later round finishes.
Absolutely. And as Rummy points out in the chat, Bob the Builder is greater than Blake Builder. And I think we'd both agree with that take. So, quick interruption on this game. John in the chat asks, is Tyson Pedro a fraud? Only crushed 2 cans in the last 4 years, and before that, lost to a 2018 Shogun. You're not going to find any resistance from us, John. I'm not going to say to his level of talent or his ability, but for this specific matchup on this specific slate, I think it's very wise to go under on Pedro. Would you agree, Jake?
Yeah, man, 100%. I think he's the best fade on the card based on recency bias. He had probably the easiest 2 opponents in the UFC in his last 2 fights, and finished those guys. I mean, in fairness, in the Shogun fight, he blew out his knee. So
Sure.
I mean, I'll sort of give him a pass there. And then he had like a ton of knee issues, a bunch of complications, and they've been easing him back. I mean, his manager definitely needs a raise. He just keeps getting great matchups, but he doesn't really he can land submissions, but he doesn't really go for takedowns. He's a low volume guy, and now he's going against a guy who's going to be running away in Bukakis for basically every fight where we see Modestus, he's circling away from contact and making fights terrible for DFS. So yeah, I think recency bias will have people a little bit higher on Pedro, and I think it's a great fade spot.
Totally agree. All right, moving on back to fighters making their debut. We've talked about Oliveira. We've talked about Builder. Moving on down, we have Jack Jenkins, another Australian, making his debut.
Yeah, so we got the 29-year-old Jenkins coming in 10-2. He's fresh off a third-round TKO win on the Contender Series. Just dominated his opponent on the mat, threw a bunch of good elbows, split him open, just really bloody match. And then he got the stoppage with like 30 seconds to go. I think if it's not on Contender Series, maybe the ref just lets the fight end. But, you want to give the guy the finish for the performance he put on. So they jumped in. They're like, all right, that's enough. You got to finish. But it was a good performance. He absolutely dominated the guy on the ground. And then you look one fight further back, and you're like, oh, okay, so this guy's a grappler. Guess again, he lands like 4 million significant strikes over 5 rounds in an eternal MMA featherweight title fight. Never even shot for a takedown, and he was going against the guy that could grapple there. So, I mean, really, he just changes up his strategy. He's striking against grapplers, grappling against strikers. I mean, it seems like he comes in with smart game plans. And guy's really impressive. He can put up huge volume. He's broken multiple opponents' legs with his leg kicks. So obviously he's throwing heavy leg kicks. One thing that I thought was interesting in terms of DFS and betting is 80% of his wins have come early, but his last 5 fights have all seen the second round. So he's generally wearing on guys, getting finishes in the later rounds, whether it's on the ground or through striking or just taking out their legs. So I think some of those late round props are interesting with him, and just his well-roundedness, I think, is going to be a problem for people in the division.
Yeah, breath of fresh air for someone to fight a smart game plan. So let's see if he can implement that again tonight. Booncoats in the chat says Jenkins inside the distance or Luke Boonme inside the distance. I don't know if it's a question or you're saying both, but if you had to choose one of those, Jake, to bet, what would you pick?
I mean, Loma's at 7 straight decisions, so obviously she's a longer shot. I think that this matchup against Reed is a good spot for her to potentially get like a ground and pound late stoppage. But I mean, for sure, it's going to be Jenkins is more likely to get a finish, but you'll get better odds on Loma. I mean, personally, I'm betting both of those.
For sure. All right, speaking of Loma, Mike in the chat, what's up, Mike, says, is she good leverage or a trap with all the options up top? And Mike, I'll let you a little insider secret here. Jake is so high on Loma that one of his subscribers unsubscribed once they saw Loma's projections and Jake's prediction for the fight, because that's how high he is on her. So, Jake, maybe you can expand just a little bit on why you like her in this matchup.
I mean, she's coming off a career performance where, I mean, she left so many points on the table. She scored 95 DraftKings points. So you look at her last fight, she almost gets submitted in the first round, like ends up in an arm triangle choke, then almost gets armbarred. So like she loses a ton of potential time in the first round. Second round, there's like 35 seconds to go. She's in top position on the mat. She stands up, walks away, turns her back to her opponent, almost gets tackled, gives up more points right there. Third round, she gets caught in a leg lock and gets out of it, and then just sits there on all fours on the mat and waits for her opponent to take her back, and then gets controlled for a few more minutes and still scored 95 DraftKings points in that fight, despite all of those mistakes. So now she's facing someone with absolutely no ground game in Elise Reed, who won't be throwing up all those submission attempts that will be slowing her down. I think if Loma comes in with another wrestling-heavy game plan, I think she's an exceptional leverage spot. And I think, we could see her score like 110, 120 points in a decision if she just absolutely dominates on the ground, which I'm not saying that will happen. I mean, typically, she's scoring like in the 90s in decision wins, but her wrestling has gotten better every single fight. And I think this is where the perfect spot for her to show that, because Elise Reed's been finished on the mat in both of her UFC losses. One of those was against Sam Hughes, who Loma, beat up already. So I think, I mean, not to do any MMA math here, but, obviously Loma greater than Hughes, greater than Reed. I mean, that's just how this works.
And her ownership, what do we have projected for her on DraftKings today?
We have her at 14%. And I looked back last time and we had her projected like 11%. Last time she came in at 6% owned when she was, also expensive that time. I think that'll go up a little bit after seeing how well she did in her last fight. But how many people are going to be clicking on Loma instead of, Jack Della Milena and Islam Makhachev and then, the new guy Jenkins and then you got Zubaira? I mean, she's going to be the last person that people want to click. So, I mean, I think that if anything, she's going to be even lower owned than we ever projected. So, I mean, yeah, I would say she's one of the best, leverage tournament spots on the slate.
Love to hear that. Hopefully none of you unsubscribe after listening to that. So, all right, going back to new fighters on the card, we only have one more. It is Francisco Prado. No, we have two more. I apologize. And we're running out of time here, so let's go through this quickly, Jake. Francisco Prado.
Yeah, young 20-year-old guy, 11-0, 100% finishing rate, 8 first-round finishes coming out of Argentina. You have to wonder about the level of competition he's been facing. Generally looking to get fights to the ground, beat guys up with ground and pound. He's landed like a Von Flute show, kind of from like a weird side control crucifix position, which I thought was bizarre. And then he went for it again in his next fight. So apparently he's looking for that move a lot. So if you try to guillotine this guy, he's gonna look for a Von Flue. But man, he's so young, hasn't really faced much in competition. I mean, he's got power on the feet. He will wrestle, which is good for his potential in DFS. But I mean, I think it's a tough spot for him. I would call him a boomer bust guy. With all of his finishes, he's never even been the distance in a fight. He's seen the third round one time. He's going against Jamie Malarkey, we've seen him get rocked and get finished. He's been knocked out 3 times. But I'm always higher than the field on Malarkey. I think Malarkey's probably going to finish this kid, but I think the winner here likely scores well.
Fair enough. All right, and the final one, we have Shannon Ross making his debut, the Turkish delight from Australia.
Yeah. I mean, this guy, 33-year-old Australian guy, 12-6. He's been finished in 2 of his last 3 fights. He's coming off a Contender Series round 2 KO loss where he got knocked down 3 times in the fight, and then afterwards found out he was fighting with a burst appendix and blood poisoning. So the UFC was so excited when they heard that. They're like, yeah, we're giving you a contract regardless. That's awesome that you came out here. So, I mean, the guy's just a brawler. He makes for good fights, super high-paced, apparently not a very good chin. He'll wrestle, but has terrible top control, which is, I mean, everything's great for DFS. He gets knocked down, he gets takedowns, but can't hold them. High volume, constantly pushing forward. He's going to be, looking for a big performance in front of his home crowd. I think this is the type of guy where every time he fights, we're going to be targeting that fight.
I love to hear that. Someone did ask in the chat, do you think the crowd will play an impact here? Does that factor into your projections or your exposures at all, Jake, or are you just letting it ride?
I mean, like look at the England cards we had. Like, yeah, we saw some English fighters put on like really good performances, but I think you have to do it on a fighter by fighter basis. Like people like Molly McCann completely feed off the crowd. So on this card, I think there's certain guys that may feed off the card, like maybe Jack Della Molina, maybe Jack Jenkins. But I think other guys, I'm not so sure they'll feed off the crowd. Like I don't trust that Justin Taffa will feed off the crowd. So I think I'm kind of looking at it case by case. I would say Ross might be a guy that feeds off the crowd, but I think you really need to look at each guy. And I mean, it's very subjective to say. So I mean, it's probably safer just to not even factor that in. But if you want to, I wouldn't just automatically give every Australian like a blind boost, if that's the question.
Fair enough. Yeah, lots of speculation there. All right, we got to close out the show really quickly. Fighters that have less than 4 fights under their belt, are they good? Are they bad? Is this matchup good? Or is this matchup bad? Jake, we have Don Shainis against Jack Jenkins.
Yeah, he's a bad fighter and a bad matchup.
Fair enough. Clayton Rodriguez is, I think, how I pronounced it correctly, judging by John Anik. So Rodriguez.
Yeah, I think he's a good fighter, just cardio concerns, and I think it's a good matchup.
Cool. We have one more, right? Oh, Jack Della Maddalena.
Yeah, man, he's a really good fighter. It's a tough matchup, step up, but I still think it's a good matchup. Brown's been finished in 3 of his 4 UFC losses.
Cool. All right, we'll close out the show here with a fight that you have to target for DFS, favorite prize picks play, and our stream parlay of the week. Jake, which fight? It could be very quickly. Which fight, whoever wins, is likely to score very well?
Yeah, I mean, I already touched on it. It's going to be the Rodriguez-Ross fight. I think some people are going to be looking at Crute Menafield, but I think that has a lot more bust potential than people realize. So Rodriguez-Ross.
Like that a lot. Okay. Best prize picks play on the board tonight.
I like Loma over 2 takedowns. She landed 4 in her last fight. Reed's been really, really suspect defensive wrestling. So I really like Loma over 2 takedowns.
Staking his reputation on Loma. What could go wrong? And finally, we'll close it out with our stream parlay of the week. There's a question. Do we think the Melsik-Kulibau fight, we haven't touched on that at all. Could it be optimal? I think so, potentially. A little bit lower volume. But my side of the stream parlay is actually, I was surprised when these odds came out. I'm surprised where the odds still are. But Jake, Bagdasarian money line is my side of the stream parlay.
Yeah, man. I told you, I think he should be like a negative 140 favorite or something. I think the only concern there is neither guy grapples. Neither guy has the best cardio. So they're both kind of reliant on getting a knockout in the first 2 rounds. I mean, you look at the finishing odds, Melzik's like 24%, Kulibau's like 21%. And that kind of gives you an idea of kind of their chances for ending up in the optimal lineup.
Fair. And what are you going to pair it with?
I really like Porter decision, man. Porter's money line is plus 105. His decision line is plus 360. His last 3 wins have come by decision. Like, he's a volume guy, not a power guy. I think those lines should be much, much closer. So if I can get Porter decision at plus 360, I'm taking that all day. So if we pair those together with Melzik money line, it's plus 785 for the parlay.
All right, we'll take that. Get a little extra bucks in our pockets to fire on some Super Bowl props tomorrow. For any other, again, it's 3:30, so still 2.5 hours before the slate locks. If you want more information, check out Jake's site, MMA DFS.com. His sheet breaks down every single fight from a betting and DFS perspective. The archive, especially valuable when we have multi-5-round fight cards, as you can go back and look at historical data to see what has won and what ownership has looked like. Basically, all the research you need from past slates. OccupyFantasy.com is where you can read the Daily Plug, where Jake puts his top plays, lineup construction tips, favorite bets, prize picks plays, contest selection. Everything you need, the roadmap to a slate, is on OccupyFantasy.com. Our Occupy model ranks every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings with projected ownership, and our lineup builder is live, allows you to build up to 300 FanDuel or DraftKings UFC DFS lineups. So that'll do it for this video. We appreciate you watching. As always, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Get notified when we go live, upload these videos for every UFC slate. Give us a thumbs up. We appreciate any questions. It's too late now to comment on the video or comment in the chat. Instead, join our Discord server. OccupyFantasy.com/Discord is where you can hit us up, sweat the fights out with us. So for Jake at DFS_MMA, I just realized 32 minutes into the stream, I did not change Jake's tag on the screen. That is not his Twitter name. It is at DFS_MMA. So make sure you go follow him correctly there. Follow me at Brian Jester FF. Follow us at Occupy Fantasy. Thanks for listening. Good luck, UFC 284.